where the secrets of the heart are written with ink and sealed with scandal. Welcome to the Countess's Chronicles channel.
You've been lied to about your biggest flaw? That thing everyone keeps telling you to fix, to hide, to apologize for? It's not your problem. And here's the controversial truth they don't want you to know. The people criticizing you are simply too small to handle what you bring. I know that sounds arrogant, maybe even delusional. But stay with me, because what I'm about to share will completely flip your understanding of rejection, belonging, and self-worth. There's a segredo hidden in plain sight that society desperately wants to keep from you, because the moment you understand it, you become impossible to control, impossible to diminish, impossible to convince that you need to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for someone of your magnitude. Let me paint you a picture that'll make this crystal clear. Imagine a woman in the 1800s, tall, striking, commanding every room she enters. In any other era, in any other context, she'd be celebrated as regal, powerful, magnificent. But in her world, she's a problem. Too tall for the delicate standards of femininity. Too imposing for men who need to feel bigger. Too visible for a society that wants women to blend into the wallpaper. She spent years absorbing the message that something fundamental about her is wrong, that her very existence is an inconvenience others must tolerate. Sound familiar? Maybe your too much isn't height. Maybe it's your voice, your ambition, your intensity, your refusal to perform happiness when you're not feeling it. Whatever it is, you know that weight of being treated like your natural state is somehow an offense against the universe. Here's where it gets interesting, where the mysterio deepens and everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. One night, at yet another suffocating social event where she's been relegated to the corners and the whispers, something shifts. The most powerful, most feared man in the room, the Duke everyone wants but nobody can reach, walks in. And instead of choosing the petite, demure, appropriate women throwing themselves at him, he cuts through the entire ballroom and extends his hand to her. To the woman everyone dismissed. To the problem nobody wanted to solve. To the person who was told she'd never fit. And in that single choice, everything changes. Not because she transformed into something else, but because someone finally had the vision to see what was always there. Now, here's the part that'll probably make you uncomfortable. The revelation that challenges everything you've been taught about how to succeed in life. You don't need to change. You don't need to become more palatable, more digestible, easier for mediocre people to swallow. What you need, and this is going to sound too simple to be true, is better rooms and better company. The ballrooms you've been trying to squeeze into weren't designed for someone of your specifications, and that's not a commentary on your worth. It's a commentary on their limitations. But we've been so thoroughly programmed to believe that rejection means something's wrong with us that we spend decades in self-improvement purgatory, sanding down our edges, dimming our light, making ourselves smaller, all in pursuit of fitting into spaces that were always going to be too cramped for what we actually are. This story, this fictional tale of a duchess and a duke, of height and ballrooms and social codigos, it's not really about them. It's about you. It's about that characteristic you've been trying to fix, manage, or hide. It's about the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that others find acceptable while your authentic self slowly suffocates under layers of pretense. It's about the occulto prison we create when we internalize other people's limitations as our own flaws. And, most importantly, it's about what happens when you stop apologizing for taking up space and start understanding that you weren't too much for the right situations. You were simply in the wrong rooms, surrounded by people with vision too small to see what you actually offer. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through this story, beat by beat. And with each scene, we're going to unpack a truth about belonging, context, and self-worth that'll fundamentally shift how you see your own problems. You're going to learn why your biggest critics are often people who've never operated at your level, why public validation from the right person changes everything and nothing, and most critically, how to identify when you're in the wrong ballroom so you can stop wasting years trying to fit in and start finding or creating spaces where you naturally belong. This isn't about becoming someone else. This is about understanding that you've been a masterpiece in a room full of people who only recognize stick figures, and it's time to find your gallery. By the end of this, you'll see rejection differently, not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as information about incompatibility. You'll understand why the same traits that make you too much in one context make you irreplaceable in another. And you'll learn the specific signs that tell you when you're in a space that'll never appreciate what you bring, so you can redirect your energy toward environments where your natural way of being isn't just accepted. It's exactly what they've been searching for. The Duchess's story ends with a dance, but yours is just beginning. And the révélation waiting for you is bigger than any ballroom could contain. There's something peculiar about walking into a room and feeling like you've already lost before you've even said a word. It's that weight on your shoulders, that silent judgment that seems to float in the air like an invisible fog. Picture this: a grand ballroom in the 1800s, chandeliers sparkling like stars, and a young duchess stepping through those massive doors. She's tall, strikingly so, her frame commanding attention whether she wants it or not. But here's the twist. Her height isn't seen as regal. It's seen as a problem, a vestigio of something that doesn't quite fit the delicate mold society carved out for women. Before she even crosses the threshold, the whispers begin, spreading like wildfire through silk gowns and tailored suits. Now, you might be thinking, well, that was back then. But let's be real. We've all been that duchess. Maybe your defect isn't height. Maybe it's your voice, too loud for boardrooms that prefer whispers. Maybe it's your ambition, too fierce for people who've grown comfortable with mediocrity. Whatever it is, you know that feeling when your presence becomes the enigma everyone needs to solve, dissect, and ultimately reject. I remember walking into networking events early in my career, feeling like every eye was cataloging my differences before I could even introduce myself. It's exhausting, isn't it? When your so-called flaws arrive before your talents, before your kindness, before anything that actually matters. Here's where the analogy gets interesting. Imagine a giraffe born into a herd of gazelles. She's visible from miles away, her neck stretching toward the sky while everyone else grazes low. She can't hide, can't blend in, can't make herself smaller no matter how hard she tries. The gazelles don't understand her. They see her as strange, awkward, too much. But here's the secret they're missing. She can see dangers they can't, reach leaves they'll never taste, navigate terrain they'd get lost in. The problem isn't the giraffe. It's that she's being judged by gazelle standards. Our duchess faces the same conflito. She's being measured by a ruler designed for someone else entirely. Back in that ballroom, watch what happens. The men, those potential suitors who should be intrigued, they avert their eyes as if looking directly at her might turn them to stone. It's not hatred, mind you. It's discomfort. She disrupts their narrative of what a lady should be. Petite, demure, easy to tower over and protect. The women, oh, they're even more brutal in their silencio. They huddle in corners, fans fluttering like nervous birds, whispering conspiracy theories about her family lineage, her prospects, her future. Who would marry her? They ask, as if being chosen by a man is the only revelation of a woman's worth. Meanwhile, she stands there, feeling every stare like a tiny needle prick. What's truly heartbreaking is this: she starts believing them. When enough people treat your uniqueness as a mistake, you begin to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe I am too much, she thinks. Maybe I should apologize for taking up space, for being visible, for existing in a way that makes others uncomfortable. This is where the real damage happens, not in the external rejection, but in the internal acceptance of that rejection. It's like watching someone slowly erase themselves, dimming their light because others complained it was too bright. I've seen brilliant people do this, make themselves smaller and quieter, hiding their gifts like they're something prohibido rather than something precious. But here's something they don't tell you in those self-help books with their oversimplified advice. The pain doesn't come from being different. It comes from being different in the wrong context. Our Duchess isn't too tall for life. She's too tall for that particular ballroom, for that particular society, for those particular small-minded people who can't imagine beauty outside their narrow definitions. Think about it. A Ferrari isn't broken because it can't win a tractor pull. A violin isn't flawed because it can't play bass notes. Context is everything. And when you're in the wrong one, even your greatest strengths become apparent weaknesses. The mysterio isn't why she doesn't fit. It's why she's trying to fit in the first place. As the evening drags on, something shifts in the atmosphere. The orchestra plays its predictable waltzes, couples twirl in their practiced formations, and everything seems ordained to continue exactly as it always has. But our Duchess, standing there in her corner of the ballroom, starts to notice something. She's not the only one who looks uncomfortable. There are others, hiding different kinds of differences, wearing different kinds of masks. A gentleman with a limp trying to dance without favoring his leg. A young woman with brilliant ideas forced to giggle vapidly about the weather. All of them playing roles, squeezing into molds, pretending that the costume fits. And in this moment of clarity, she wonders, what if the real desaparecimiento isn't her fitting in, but rather the loss of who she truly is in the attempt? The tension in that ballroom is about to break. Because while she's learning to see through the códigos of social acceptability, someone else is about to enter. Someone who sees the world through an entirely different lens. Someone who doesn't just tolerate differences, but seeks them out. Someone who's about to prove that the problem was never her size, but the smallness of their vision. But we'll get to him in a moment. First, she needs to survive this night, this suffocating weight of judgment, this occulto battle between who she is and who they want her to be. You know what's funny? People think strength is about not feeling the pain. They see someone standing tall after rejection and assume that person doesn't hurt anymore. But that's not strength. That's survival mode. It's the armor you forge after the 10th, 20th, 100th time someone makes you feel like you're too much or not enough. Our Duchess, after countless evenings of sideways glances and polite rejections, has learned to do what we all eventually do. She pretends it doesn't matter. She walks into that ballroom now with her chin up, her posture perfect, her face an unreadable mask. To the outside world, she's conquered her insecurity. But inside, there's a guerra raging between the girl who still wants to belong and the woman who's tired of trying. I'll be honest with you, I know this armor intimately. After enough doors slam in your face, you stop knocking. After enough people tell you that you're intimidating or too intense, or whatever coded language they're using that day, you build walls. High ones, with barbed wire on top and a moat filled with sarcasm for good measure. You tell yourself it's empowerment, that you're choosing solitude, that you're above needing validation. And maybe part of that is true. But here's the segredo nobody talks about. Those walls that keep others out, they also keep you trapped inside. Our Duchess positions herself strategically in the corner of the ballroom, where she can see everything but participate in nothing. It's a vantage point born from necessity, not preference. Think about a hedgehog. Stay with me here. This analogy is better than it sounds. When a hedgehog feels threatened, those quills shoot up instantly, creating this prickly fortress that screams, "Don't touch me." It's automatic, instinctive, protective. But here's what most people don't realize. Those quills hurt the hedgehog too. They're not just facing outward. They're reminders of constant defensiveness, constant readiness for attack. Our Duchess has become exactly this. All spikes and sharp edges, ready to deflect before anyone can get close enough to wound her again. She's mastered the art of the cutting remark, the dismissive glance, the impenetrable silencio that shuts down conversations before they become vulnerabilities. People mistake this for confidence, but it's actually something far more tragic. The real conflito happens when you realize that this armor, this beautiful shield you've crafted from disappointment and determination, comes with a hidden cost. When you train yourself not to care what others think, you don't get to choose which feelings to numb. It's not like you can selectively turn off the hurt while keeping the joy dial turned up high. No, it's all or nothing. So our Duchess stops feeling the sting of rejection. Sure, but she also stops feeling the thrill of possibility. She stops hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone might see her differently. It's like she's created her own occulto prison, where she's both the guard and the inmate, keeping everyone out, but also keeping herself locked in. I remember the exact moment I realized I'd gone too far with my own armor. Someone, a genuinely kind person, tried to compliment me, and my immediate reaction was to search for the insult hidden inside it, the conspirasome, the ulterior motive. I'd become so good at protecting myself that I couldn't recognize genuine connection anymore. Everything was a potential threat. Every kindness a possible trap. That's where our Duchess is right now, standing in that ballroom corner like a statue, admired from a distance, untouchable, but also completely alone. The other guests have learned to leave her be. They've interpreted her armor as arrogance, her silence as disdain, her self-protection as superiority. The very defense mechanism she created to survive has become the prison she can't escape. Here's the enigma that keeps her up at night. How do you lower the drawbridge without getting invaded? How do you risk being hurt again when the scars from the last time haven't even healed? It's like asking someone who's been burned to play with fire again, to trust that this time will be different. The logical part of her brain says it's safer this way, that expecting nothing means never being disappointed. But there's another part, quieter, nearly suffocated but still breathing, that wonders if she's thrown out the baby with the bathwater. She watches other women at these balls, women who seem lighter somehow, who can laugh without checking if someone's laughing at them, who can stumble through a conversation without analyzing every word for hidden meanings. She doesn't know if they're naive or if she's broken. The orchestra plays on, and she stands there like a fortress nobody bothers to siege anymore. It should feel like victory, this imperviousness to judgment. But victories aren't supposed to feel this hollow, are they? There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being strong for too long, from being the rock everyone else crashes against while you slowly erode from the inside. She's become so good at not needing anyone that she's forgotten how to want anyone. the vestigio of who she used to be. That girl who once entered ballrooms with hope, who believed in fairy tales and happy endings, feels like a distant memory, like something prohibido that she's not allowed to access anymore. But tonight, something is different. There's a shift in the air, an electricity she can't quite name. While she's busy maintaining her armor, polishing her indifference, preparing for another evening of dignified isolation, fate is preparing its own revelation. Because sometimes the universe gets tired of watching you protect yourself into oblivion. Sometimes it sends someone who doesn't just knock on your walls, someone who has walls of their own and recognizes the architecture of self-preservation when he sees it. Someone is about to walk through those ballroom doors, and everything she's built to keep herself safe is about to be tested in ways she never imagined. There's a moment before everything changes when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The ballroom is humming with its usual social theatrics, forced laughter, strategic conversations, the elaborate dance of people trying to impress people they don't even like. Then the massive oak doors swing open, and it's as if someone hit pause on the entire scene. Every head turns, every conversation stops mid-sentence. Even the orchestra seems to play a half-note quieter. He's arrived. The Duke of Ashford. And suddenly, our Duchess's armor doesn't feel quite as impenetrable as it did 5 seconds ago, because she recognizes something in the way everyone reacts to him. It's the same mixture of fear and fascination she's seen directed at herself, but amplified, weaponized, turned into something that commands rather than repels. Let me tell you about the first time someone saw past my defenses. Really saw me, not the version I presented to the world. It was terrifying, honestly, because when you've spent years perfecting your mask, having someone look beneath it feels like being caught naked in public. That's what's happening right now as the Duke surveys the room with those dark, calculating eyes. He's not scanning for friends or allies. Those concepts seem beneath him. He's reading the room like a chess grandmaster, analyzing a board, seeing 10 moves ahead, understanding the Sagredo dynamics that everyone else thinks they're hiding. Our Duchess, from her corner fortress, watches him with a mixture of wariness and unwilling curiosity. She's heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. Why is he feared? Well, that's where it gets interesting. It's not just his title, though. Duke of Ashford carries weight that makes lesser nobles stumble over their own tongues. It's not even his wealth, which is rumored to rival small kingdoms. No. What makes him terrifying is simpler and more profound. He refuses to play by the rules everyone else has memorized. He doesn't smile when protocol demands it. He doesn't dance attendance on people whose opinions should matter. He doesn't pretend that the emperor's new clothes are anything but naked ambition and hollow tradition. In a society built on códigos and unspoken agreements, he's a living conspiracy against the status quo. People fear authenticity more than cruelty, you know. You can defend against cruelty, but authenticity? That exposes all your carefully constructed lies. Think about a falcon perched high above a field full of mice scurrying around at ground level. The mice are busy with their mouse concerns, their tiny territorial disputes, their elaborate mouse social hierarchies. They think they're invisible in the tall grass, that their whispered schemes are occulto, that their little dramas matter. But the falcon sees everything from above. The patterns, the pathways, the truth beneath the performance. That's the Duke. While everyone else is playing checkers on the ballroom floor, he's playing three-dimensional chess from a vantage point they can't even comprehend. He sees through the painted smiles, the false flattery, the desperate maneuvering for status. And worse, far worse, he doesn't pretend he doesn't see it. The room remains frozen as he moves with deliberate purpose. There's no hesitation in his stride, no performative greeting of important guests, no acknowledgement of the social dance everyone expects him to perform. It's as if he's created his own gravitational field, and everyone else is just orbiting helplessly around it. Our Duchess feels her heart rate quicken, an irritating betrayal of her carefully maintained composure. She tells herself it's just the general tension in the room, that Mysterio energy he brings with him like a storm cloud. But deep down, she recognizes something in him that she's never seen mirrored before. Someone else who's too much for spaces that demand you be less. Someone else carrying armor, though his is forged from power rather than pain. Then it happens. The moment that will change everything, though neither of them knows it yet. His eyes scan the room and land on her. Not a brief glance, not the polite acknowledgement of a fellow noble, but a direct, unflinching stare that seems to catalog everything about her in 3 seconds flat. And here's what makes her breath catch. He doesn't look away. Everyone else has learned to avert their gaze when confronted with her height, her presence, her refusal to shrink. They treat looking at her like staring at the sun. Dangerous, something to be done in quick, stolen glances. But he looks at her the way an art collector might examine a masterpiece others have overlooked, the way an explorer might study a map to hidden treasure. There's no judgment in that gaze, no assessment of whether she fits some predetermined mold. There's recognition, and that's somehow more terrifying than rejection ever was. The ballroom watches, because of course they do, as he makes his choice. He doesn't ask for introductions through proper channels. He doesn't send an intermediary to gauge interest. He simply begins walking, cutting through the crowd like a ship through water, his destination clear and absolute. Every eye follows his path. The whispers start immediately, that familiar sound of social conspiração, everyone trying to decode what his choice means. Is he actually walking toward her? Does he know who she is? This must be some kind of mistake. But there's no mistake. For the first time in longer than she can remember, our Duchess feels something crack in her carefully constructed armor. Not the whole thing. That would be too much, too fast. Just a hairline fracture, thin as paper, dangerous as a fault line before an earthquake. The silence that descends as he stops directly in front of her is deafening. It's the kind of quiet that holds its breath, waiting for the revelation of what comes next. She's tall. They've made sure she knows this, have weaponized this fact against her for years. But he's taller. She's imposing. They've used this word like an accusation, but he's commanding in a way that makes imposing seem like a compliment for amateurs. For the first time since she stopped being that hopeful girl, she doesn't feel like a giraffe among gazelles. She feels like she's encountered another species entirely, one that operates on a frequency she'd almost forgotten existed. And as his hand extends toward her, a gesture we'll explore in the next movement of this story, she realizes that every desaparecimento of joy, every buried hope, every piece of herself she thought was lost forever, might have just been waiting for this exact moment to resurface. There are moments in life that divide your story into before and after. This is one of them. His hand extends toward her, not tentatively, not with the apologetic energy of someone doing charity work, but with the certainty of someone who knows exactly what he wants and doesn't waste time second-guessing it. Our Duchess stares at that outstretched hand like it's a puzzle she can't quite solve. In her experience, hands extended toward her usually come with conditions, with hesitation, with that flicker of doubt that says, "I'm doing this, despite what you are." But his hand? It's steady, unwavering. An invitation that feels less like a question and more like a statement of fact. I remember the first time someone saw me, really saw me, without flinching, without that momentary flash of, "Oh, you're not what I expected." It's disorienting in the best and worst ways, like suddenly discovering you've been living in black and white and someone just turned on the color. She takes his hand. What else can she do? To refuse would create a scene. And despite her armor, she's not in the business of causing public spectacles. But the moment their fingers touch, something shifts. It's not some fairy tale spark or lightning bolt. Life isn't that neat. It's subtler and somehow more profound. It's the recognition that his hand doesn't dwarf hers the way most men's hands disappear in her grip, making them feel emasculated and her feel monstrous. His hand is larger, stronger, completely unbothered by her size. As he leads her onto the dance floor, she realizes something that sends a shiver down her spine. He's taller than her. Not by a little, by enough that she has to look up, an experience so foreign, so completely outside her normal reality, that for a moment she forgets to maintain her carefully constructed indifference. Think about two puzzle pieces that never fit anywhere else suddenly clicking together. That's what this looks like to everyone watching. She's tall, he's taller. She's imposing. He owns the room with a presence that makes imposing look quaint. She takes up space. He expands space around him simply by existing in it. Suddenly, all those characteristics that made her an enigma, that made people uncomfortable, that turned her into the subject of whispered conspiração, they don't seem like flaws anymore. They seem like prerequisites, like she wasn't too much for any man. She was simply waiting for the right scale. The other couples on the dance floor seemed to shrink, becoming background noise in a scene that's suddenly only about two people who finally make sense in context with each other. The music swells, a waltz, because of course it is, and they begin to move. Here's where the real magica happens, and I don't mean that in some mystical sense. I mean the practical magic of physics and compatibility. When she's danced before, on those rare occasions someone brave or foolish enough asked, it's been awkward. She's had to hunch her shoulders, bend her knees slightly, make herself smaller to accommodate partners who couldn't handle her full height. She's stepped on toes, thrown off rhythms, created that uncomfortable silencio where both parties are trying hard to pretend this isn't a disaster. But with him, they move like water, like they've been dancing together for years, like her height isn't a problem to be solved, but an asset to be celebrated. His lead is firm without being controlling, confident without being aggressive. She's so startled by how natural this feels that her armor cracks a little more. It's dangerous, this feeling. She's spent years building walls specifically to avoid moments like this, moments where hope might creep back in, where she might start believing that maybe, just maybe, she's not the problem. But watching other couples glance their way, seeing the shift from pity to something else entirely, envy, maybe, or awe, she can't deny what's happening. They're not just dancing. They're making a statement. Every turn, every perfectly executed step, every moment where they move in complete synchronization is a rebellion against every rule that said she was too much. The vestigio of her former self, that girl who believed she could be chosen, starts stirring from its long hibernation. The ballroom has become their stage, and everyone else is just an audience. Women who whispered about her unfortunate height now watch with barely concealed jealousy. Men who avoided her gaze now stare openly, trying to understand what the Duke sees that they missed. It's not that she's changed. She's exactly the same person she was 20 minutes ago. But context is everything, isn't it? A diamond in a pawn shop is still a diamond, but put it in Tiffany's window, and suddenly everyone recognizes its value. She's not a woman who's too tall anymore. She's half of an impossible magnetic pair that commands attention not despite their presence, but because of it. The códigos of social acceptability are being rewritten in real time, and they're the ones holding the pen. As the dance continues, something even more profound happens. She stops thinking. For someone who's spent years hyperanalyzing every social interaction, cataloging every slight, preparing for every potential rejection, this mental silence is revolutionary. She's not worrying about how she looks, whether she's stepping wrong, if people are judging her. She's just present, moving, breathing, existing without apology. And in his eyes, those dark, knowing eyes that miss nothing, she sees something she hasn't seen directed at herself in longer than she can remember. Admiration without caveat. Not, she's impressive for someone so tall, or she's confident despite her appearance. Just admiration. Pure, simple, uncomplicated. It's intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The waltz builds toward its conclusion, and she knows that when this dance ends, something fundamental will have shifted. She can't go back to her corner fortress now, can't pretend that this didn't happen, can't unknow what it feels like to be chosen so publicly, so deliberately, by someone who doesn't just tolerate her differences, but seems to prefer them. The occulto truth she's been hiding from herself is now impossible to ignore. She wasn't broken. She wasn't wrong. She was just in the wrong ballrooms, surrounded by the wrong people, measuring herself against the wrong standards. And as the final notes play, and he bows, actually bows to her, like she's something precious rather than problematic, she realizes that this moment of revelation is both an ending and a beginning. The question is, what happens when the music stops and reality rushes back in? The music fades, but the impact reverberates like thunder across the ballroom. Here's what nobody tells you about vindication. It doesn't feel quite how you imagined it would during all those nights you spent rehearsing revenge fantasies in your head. When the Duke, the most powerful, most feared, most sought-after man in the entire room, chooses you publicly, deliberately, in front of everyone who made you feel invisible, it's not just satisfying. It's disorienting. Our Duchess stands there, hand still in his, and watches the social landscape rearrange itself in real time. The same women who whispered conspiracy theories about her unfortunate situation now lean toward each other with different whispers, ones tinged with jealousy and desperate recalculation. The same men who couldn't meet her eyes now stare openly, trying to reverse engineer what they missed, what segredo quality the Duke saw that they were too blind to recognize. I'll never forget the moment someone publicly chose me after years of being overlooked. It was a professional setting. I'd been passed over for promotions, talked over in meetings, treated like my contributions were background noise. Then a CEO, someone whose opinion actually moved needles, not only acknowledged my work, but championed it in front of everyone who'd dismissed me. The shift was instantaneous. Suddenly, the same ideas that had been too aggressive became visionary. The same confidence that had been off-putting became leadership material. Nothing about me changed, but everything about how I was perceived transformed overnight. That's the power of context, of having someone with authority say, "This person matters," in a way that's impossible to ignore or reinterpret. Here's where the analogy gets really interesting. Think about diamonds. Stay with me here. A rough diamond, straight from the earth, looks like a dirty rock. Put it on a street corner, and people walk past without a second glance. It's too rough, too unpolished, doesn't fit their mental image of what's valuable. But take that exact same stone, have a master jeweler recognize its potential, cut it, set it in platinum, and display it at Cartier. Suddenly, it's not just valuable, it's priceless. It's the same stone, the exact same carbon atoms arranged in the exact same crystalline structure. But the context changed, and with it, the perception. Our Duchess is that diamond. She was always valuable, always rare, always extraordinary. But she was being judged by people who only recognized value in familiar, pre-packaged forms. Watch what happens now. A young countess who literally turned her back on our Duchess earlier in the evening now approaches with a smile so forced it looks painful. "What a lovely dance," she says, her voice dripping with the kind of friendliness that appears only when there's something to gain. Another lady, one who'd made a cutting remark about women who don't know their place, now positions herself nearby, hoping for an introduction to the Duke. It's almost comedic, this sudden reversal, except there's something deeply sad about it too. These people don't see her any differently than they did an hour ago. They're just responding to proximity to power, to the Duke's stamp of approval, to fear of being on the wrong side of social momentum. The revelation here isn't about her worth, it's about their bankruptcy of authentic judgment. But here's the conflito that's churning in our Duchess's mind. Should she feel victorious or hollow? Part of her, the part that's been hurt and humiliated, wants to savor this moment, to watch these people scramble and squirm and pretend they never doubted her. There's a satisfaction in watching the tables turn, in seeing people who made you feel small suddenly treat you like you're significant. But another part of her, the part that's been paying attention, recognizes the emptiness of validation that comes from people who only see value when someone else points it out first. These same people will turn on her again the moment the wind changes direction, the moment the Duke's attention shifts elsewhere. Their approval isn't based on seeing her truly. It's based on seeing his choice and desperately trying to align themselves with power. The Duke, for his part, seems almost amused by the social gymnastics happening around them. He hasn't released her hand, a detail that hasn't escaped anyone's notice. In a society where physical contact is measured in seconds and governed by strict códigos, this prolonged connection is a statement. It says mine without words, creates an occulto understanding that shifts her status from woman too tall to marry to woman under the Duke's protection, and possibly his interest. She can feel the weight of this shift, the way it simultaneously elevates and constrains her. Because here's what's complicated about being chosen by someone powerful. You gain their status, but you also become defined by your relationship to them rather than your intrinsic self. I learned something crucial during my own experience with public validation. The people who matter don't wait for someone else to tell them you're worth their time. The CEO who championed me? She'd been watching long before she spoke up. She'd seen the quality of my work, the substance beneath the surface, the vestigio of potential others ignored. The validation wasn't what made me valuable. It just made my value visible to people who only see in borrowed light. Same with our Duchess. The Duke didn't make her worthy of attention. He simply had the vision to see what was always there, and the power to make others see it too. But the question gnawing at her is this: does she want to be seen only through someone else's eyes, even if those eyes see her truly? As the evening progresses, she notices something profound. The same height that made her a pariah now makes her regal. The same commanding presence that made her intimidating now makes her distinguished. The same qualities that were prohibido in the context of what a lady should be are suddenly celebrated in the context of being the Duke's chosen partner. Nothing about her changed. The characteristics that made her feel like a misfit are exactly the same. But the frame shifted, and with it, the entire picture transformed. This is the segredo that'll keep her up tonight. You don't need to shrink yourself or change your essence. You need to find contexts, people, and places that have the vision to see your supposed flaws as the features they actually are. You need to stop trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for someone of your magnitude and start finding or creating spaces that celebrate exactly what you bring. So here's where we pull back the curtain and talk about what this fictional tale, because yes, it's a story, a beautifully crafted enigma of what could be, actually means for your real life. Our Duchess's journey isn't just about a tall woman finding a taller man at a ball. That's the surface, the pretty wrapping paper. The gift inside is something far more valuable. Understanding that your so-called defects aren't bugs in your programming. They're features waiting for the right operating system. I spent years trying to sand down my rough edges to make myself more palatable, more digestible, easier for others to swallow. I dimmed my intensity, softened my opinions, made myself smaller in 1,000 invisible ways. And you know what I got for all that effort? Absolutely nothing except exhaustion and the nagging feeling that I was betraying myself for people who wouldn't recognize authenticity if it knocked on their door with a Segredo password. Let's get practical for a moment because theory without application is just expensive daydreaming. Think about your own Duchess moment, that characteristic about yourself that you've been told is too much or not enough. Maybe you're too analytical in a workplace that values gut feelings over data. Maybe you're too emotional in a family that treats vulnerability like a weakness. Maybe you're too ambitious in a social circle that's comfortable with mediocrity. Maybe you're too creative in an industry that rewards conformity. Whatever it is, you've probably spent considerable energy trying to fix it, manage it, apologize for it, hide it. But here's the revelation that'll save you years of wasted effort. That characteristic isn't your problem. Being in the wrong context is your problem. Here's an analogy that might land better than all the Duchess drama. Imagine you're a telescope, a powerful, sophisticated instrument designed to see distant galaxies, to peer into the depths of space, to observe things most people can't even imagine. Now imagine someone puts you in a small room with low ceilings and criticizes you for being too big, too complicated, too much. Why can't you be more like a magnifying glass, they ask. So simple, so easy to use, fits in anyone's pocket. You start believing them. You think maybe there's something wrong with you for being a telescope, but the problem isn't your design. It's that you're in a room when you should be in an observatory. You're not too big. The spaces you've been trying to fit into are too small. The solution isn't to dismantle yourself piece by piece until you fit. The solution is to find or create spaces that were built for instruments of your magnitude. Now, let's talk about the silencio that happens when you're in the wrong rooms. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's the deafening sound of your potential being muffled, of your gifts being wasted, of your authentic self slowly suffocating under layers of performance and pretense. You know you're in the wrong ballroom when you constantly feel like you're apologizing for existing, when your natural way of being requires endless explanation and justification, when you're exhausted from managing other people's discomfort with who you are. I want you to pay attention to these 3 signs, because they're not subtle once you know what to look for. First, you find yourself constantly translating your thoughts into a language others will accept, like you're perpetually code-switching between who you are and who they need you to be. That's sign number 1, that you're in a space designed for different specifications. Second sign, Your greatest strengths are consistently treated as your biggest problems. If you're detail-oriented and they call you obsessive, if you're passionate and they call you intense, if you're thorough and they call you slow, that's not feedback. That's incompatibility. It's like criticizing a surgeon for being too precise or a poet for being too imaginative. These aren't flaws to correct. They're indicators that you're being judged by standards that don't apply to your particular form of excellence. Third sign, and this one's crucial, you notice that the people who succeed in these spaces are fundamentally different from you, and not in a "I need to develop new skills" way, but in a "I would have to betray my core nature" way. When the path to acceptance requires you to become someone else entirely, you're not in the wrong version of yourself. You're in the wrong room entirely. These are your vestigios, your clues, your breadcrumbs leading you toward the exit. So how do you find your Duke? And I don't mean a romantic partner, though that's one application. I mean those people, places, and purposes that don't just tolerate your differences, but actively celebrate them. Start by studying where your energy expands rather than contracts. Notice the environments where you finish conversations feeling energized rather than drained, where your ideas are met with "tell me more" instead of "that's interesting, but..." Pay attention to the people who ask you to elaborate on your thoughts rather than summarize them, who are curious about your process rather than just your conclusions, who seem genuinely excited by the very qualities others have criticized. These are your indicators, your códigos for deciphering where you actually belong. Look for contexts where your too much becomes exactly right. If you're too analytical for casual friendships, maybe you belong in research, in strategy, in fields where depth of thinking is the price of entry rather than a social liability. If you're too emotional for corporate environments, maybe you belong in counseling, in arts, in spaces where feeling deeply is a superordinate rather than a weakness to manage. If you're too unconventional for traditional paths, maybe you're meant to create new paths rather than follow existing ones. The Duke didn't find the Duchess by accident. He was looking for exactly what she offered, in a room full of people who couldn't see past their narrow definitions of desirable. Your task isn't to become more desirable to people with limited vision. It's to position yourself where people with expansive vision can find you. Here's the final piece of this puzzle, the occulto truth that ties everything together. The moment you stop trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you, you create a gravitational pull that attracts what actually aligns with who you are. Our Duchess spent years making herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, and she remained invisible. The moment she stood in her full height, owned her presence, stopped apologizing for taking up space, she became visible to exactly the person who was looking for someone of her stature. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical physics. When you're authentic, you emit a signal that reaches people on your frequency. When you're performing, you attract people who like the performance, and then you're trapped maintaining a show forever. The conflito resolves when you realize that being chosen for who you pretend to be is lonelier than not being chosen at all. But being chosen for who you actually are? That's not just validation. That's liberation. And that's the real story beneath our Duchess's tale. So, here we are, at the end of our story, but hopefully at the beginning of yours. You've watched our fictional Duchess transform, not by changing who she was, but by finding a context where who she was became exactly right. You've seen how the Duke's choice didn't make her valuable. It simply revealed the value that was always there to people who'd been too blind to see it. Now comes the uncomfortable question, the one that separates people who consume stories from people who let stories transform them. What are you going to do with this segredo you now possess? Are you going to close this video, nod thoughtfully, Maybe feel inspired for 15 minutes, and then go right back to shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you? Or are you going to take what you've learned here and actually apply it to the ballrooms you're currently trapped in? Let me get provocative for a moment because you need to hear this. How many more years are you going to waste trying to become acceptable to people whose opinions shouldn't matter? How many more nights are you going to lie awake wondering what's wrong with you when the real question is what's wrong with the rooms you keep trying to enter? Here's the brutal truth. The revelation that might sting but will set you free. Every day you spend performing a version of yourself that others find palatable is a day you're not spending being seen for who you actually are. And the tragedy isn't just that you're exhausted, it's that somewhere out there, your Duke is looking for exactly what you are. And they can't find you because you're too busy hiding behind a mask of acceptability. So let me ask you directly. What's the one characteristic about yourself you've been apologizing for? The thing you've been told is too much or not enough. Can you name it right now? Here's your homework, and I'm serious about this. I want you to take that characteristic, that vestigio of your authentic self you've been trying to bury, and instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" I want you to ask, "Where does this become an asset?" If you're too analytical, where is deep thinking valued over surface-level charm? If you're too emotional, where is feeling deeply considered a gift rather than a liability? If you're too unconventional, where is innovation rewarded rather than punished? Write this down. Actually write it down, because thoughts without action are just comfortable fantasies. And then, this is the crucial part, I want you to identify one space in your life right now where you're clearly in the wrong ballroom. One relationship, one job, one social circle, one environment where you're constantly translating yourself, where your strengths are treated as problems, where acceptance requires you to betray your core nature. Now comes the scary part, the conflito between comfort and growth. What are you willing to do about it? Because understanding you're in the wrong room means nothing if you're not willing to walk toward the exit. I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow or blow up your entire life. I'm saying start looking for the doors. Start testing new spaces. Start positioning yourself where people with expansive vision can actually find you. You know what the Duke didn't do? He didn't go looking for the Duchess in rooms full of petite, conventional women. He went to the room where she was, recognized what others missed, and made his choice public. Your job isn't to keep begging the wrong people to see you differently. Your job is to become visible in contexts where what you offer is exactly what's needed. So here's my question. What's one action you can take this week, not someday, this week, to move toward a space where you fit, rather than trying to fit into a space where you don't belong? Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the occulto fear that's probably screaming in your head right now. But what if I leave these spaces and don't find better ones? What if I stop performing and nobody likes the real me? What if I'm wrong and I actually am the problem? I get it. That fear is real, and it's kept you stuck longer than any external barrier ever could. But here's the counterintuitive truth. Staying in spaces where you have to diminish yourself doesn't protect you from rejection. It guarantees a slower, more painful form of it. You're already being rejected. You're just doing it to yourself preemptively to avoid the sting of others doing it first. At least if you show up authentically and get rejected, you know it wasn't a match. But if you show up as a performance and get accepted, you've just signed up for a lifetime of maintaining a lie. And that's not belonging. That's imprisonment with better decorations. Here's what I want you to understand about Códigos and social conspiração against authenticity. The system benefits from you believing you're the problem. When you think you need to fix yourself, you stay small, manageable, controllable. You buy the products, follow the formulas, chase the approval, and never question whether the game itself is rigged. But the moment you realize you're not too much, you're just in spaces that are too small, you become dangerous. Not to good people or healthy systems, but to mediocrity, to gatekeepers, to anyone who's built their power on making others feel insufficient. So when you start honoring your authentic self and refusing to shrink, expect resistance. Expect people to call you arrogant, difficult, too much. That's not evidence you're doing something wrong. It's evidence you're doing something right. The question is, are you brave enough to keep going anyway? Final question before you go, and this one matters more than all the others. A year from now, do you want to still be reading stories about people who found their right contexts while you're still stuck in the wrong ballrooms? Or do you want to be the story, the person who stopped performing, found their spaces, and discovered that being chosen for who you actually are feels completely different from being tolerated for who you pretend to be? The Duchess's story is fiction, a beautiful enigma we created together to illustrate a truth. But your story? That's real, unfolding right now. And how it goes depends entirely on what you do after this video ends. You've got the knowledge. You've got the framework. You've got the segredo that most people spend their entire lives never learning. The only question left is, what are you going to do with it? If this video resonated with you, if something shifted in how you see yourself and your place in the world, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep exploring these ideas about belonging, context, authenticity, and how to navigate a world that constantly asks you to be less than you are. We're building a community of people who refuse to shrink, who understand that finding your right fit isn't arrogance, but wisdom, and who are committed to becoming visible in spaces that celebrate what they bring rather than tolerating it. This is just the beginning of your revelation, and there's so much more to uncover. Don't let this be just another inspiring video you watch and forget. Let it be the moment everything changed. Subscribe, activate those notifications, and let's continue this journey together. Your ballroom is waiting. You just have to be brave enough to find it.